Esther was only 24, yet life had already carved deep lines into her soul. Her story began in silence, the kind that follows immense loss, her parents gone long before she had the chance to understand what it meant to be loved unconditionally. Orphaned at a young age, she learned to survive not by fighting the world, but by softening toward it. She lived in a tiny, crumbling apartment in a dusty neighborhood of Lagos, its single window opening to a view of the restless street market below. The walls of her room, cracked and bare, bore witness to her quiet resilience, an enduring solitude that spoke louder than words. Every morning, Esther rose before the sun, her thin arms tired but determined. With delicate hands, she prepared food to sell at her humble roadside stall, steaming jollof rice, fried plantains, simple soups rich in flavor and memory. The scent of spices followed her like a shadow, wrapping around her like a protective charm. Her stall wasn't much: a rickety wooden table, a couple of worn pots, and a patched umbrella that barely shielded her from the heat or rain. But it was hers. It was survival. Customers came and went: office workers, Okada riders, mothers with children tugging at their skirts. Some offered smiles, others barked orders. Esther, however, greeted them all the same way, with gentle eyes and a voice that held a kind of fragile grace. There was an unspoken kindness in her that lingered in the air, even after a sale had passed. She didn't speak of her struggles. She didn't need to. The way she handed out food, often slipping a little extra into someone's plate without charge, said everything. But no one truly knew her, not the depth of her loneliness, nor the silent prayers she whispered each night as she folded her apron and watched the city lights flicker in the distance. Beneath her quiet strength lay a yearning she never voiced, not for riches or comfort, but for connection, for a sign that her kindness mattered in a world that often seemed too harsh to notice. And yet, each day, she showed up. Not because she had no other choice, but because she believed, stubbornly, tenderly, that goodness had a place, even here, even in a forgotten corner of a sprawling city. Esther was not remarkable by the standards of the world, but there was something extraordinary about the way she carried her brokenness, not like a burden, but like a lantern. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of day where the air felt thick with the scent of impending rain and fried akra. Esther was stirring a pot of egusi soup, the wooden spoon moving in slow circles as her thoughts drifted, as they often did, toward the ache of absence, the kind that wrapped itself around her chest and stayed there, persistent and invisible. She almost didn't notice the man who sat down at the far end of her stall. He was old, but not frail. His presence was quiet, yet unmistakably solid, like the earth itself had settled into that plastic chair in the shape of a man. He didn't speak at first, just sat there with eyes that had seen lifetimes, watching her with the steady, contemplative gaze of someone who wasn't there for the food. Esther, accustomed to all kinds of customers, rushed, impatient, indifferent, was momentarily unsettled. She offered her usual soft greeting, but the words felt oddly fragile in her mouth. Still, she filled a plate for him: rice, stew, a piece of meat that she instinctively chose with care. He nodded in gratitude, the slightest motion, and began to eat without ceremony. Later, she would try to remember what it was exactly. The way he chewed thoughtfully, the way he looked not at the food but through it, into some place far beyond the bustle of the street, that made her uneasy. Not in fear, but in recognition. He reminded her of something she had long buried, a memory of her father's hands, rough and warm, lifting her off the ground during better days. This man, this stranger, carried that same stillness, that same sorrow-laced kindness that asked nothing but saw everything. When he finally spoke, it was not to compliment the food, as many did, nor to ask for anything. His voice was deep and low, wrapped in the rhythms of a past Esther could only imagine. "You cook like someone who remembers," he said, eyes still fixed on the horizon, as if the sky might answer for them both. She blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. But something in her chest stirred, a deep, slow tremble, as if a locked door had shifted slightly on its hinges. Over the next few weeks, he returned, never daily, never predictably, always appearing as if summoned by something she could not name. He told her his name was Papa J and little else. But as the rains began to fall more often and the streets grew slick with red mud, Esther found herself looking for him in the crowd, her eyes scanning every figure that passed. And when he came, she found she breathed a little easier. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was like peeling back the layers of a dream. He spoke of things in riddles, of spirits in trees and stories in silence, of wounds that did not bleed, but shaped the soul. Esther listened, sometimes confused, sometimes moved to stillness, unsure why her throat tightened at his words. He never asked about her life, yet she found herself wanting to tell him things, about her mother's laugh, her father's sudden absence, the emptiness that followed. She didn't, not yet. But the desire alone felt like a miracle. Papa J had a way of pausing time. When he sat across from her, it was as if the honking cars and shouting vendors faded into a distant hum. In his presence, the city became softer, the world more bearable. There was no judgment in him, only a strange kind of wisdom that wrapped around her like a blanket pulled from a forgotten childhood. And though she could not say it aloud, though it frightened her to think it, she began to hope. Not for much, just that he would return. That this connection, this quiet thread between them, might one day become something more than a passing kindness. In him, Esther saw the possibility of healing, not as a dramatic moment of salvation, but as the slow, steady unraveling of grief. A gentle voice in the dark. A seat taken at a lonely table. A name spoken and remembered. It began with a silence. Not the ordinary kind that drifted in between conversations or filled the air before sunrise. This was a heavier silence, thick and unyielding, the kind that arrives when something has gone missing and the world hasn't yet found the words to name it. Esther noticed it on a Monday. The chair, his chair, sat empty, its yellow plastic back curved ever so slightly as if still cradling the memory of his weight. At first, she thought nothing of it. Papa J had never come on a schedule, never promised he would return, never said goodbye when he left. He had always just appeared, like breath, like rain, like something woven into the fabric of her days. But when the chair remained vacant for a second day, and then a third, a strange chill wrapped itself around her ribs. She told herself he was sick, or had traveled, or perhaps grown tired of the same rice and stew. She told herself many things, but none of them settled the growing ache in her chest, a hollow that widened with each customer she served, each face she scanned, hoping it might somehow reshape itself into his. Her eyes began to betray her, catching glimpses of Papa J and strangers, a slouch here, a gait there, the corner of an old man's smile, only to dissolve again into absence. The days bled together. The market's noise, once a constant hum of life, became unbearable. The laughter of others sounded distant, distorted. Her hands, which had once prepared meals with a quiet rhythm, now hesitated. She burned the stew twice that week. Customers complained. Her mother noticed, but said nothing, only watched her daughter with worried eyes that knew better than to ask. At night, the silence deepened. Esther would lie in bed and turn the memory of him over in her mind like a stone in her palm. The way he looked at her without flinching, the way his voice could slice through her defenses, gentle but precise. She remembered his words, "You cook like someone who remembers," and wondered, achingly, if he knew then that he would disappear. Had he been saying goodbye all along in his quiet way? It was on the 7th day, the Sabbath, that she broke. The sky that morning was cloudless, cruelly bright. She walked to the market early, before the others had begun to stir. She carried with her the red plastic chair from her stall, not his, not exactly, but close enough, and placed it in the spot he used to sit. She sat across from it, staring at the empty space, as if by sheer will she could summon him back. But the wind whispered nothing. The world refused to give her an answer. Tears came then, not in a wave, but in slow, seeping drops that carved paths down her cheeks. She hated herself for crying over a man she barely knew, for missing someone who had given her nothing tangible, no number, no address, not even a real goodbye. And yet she did miss him. Fiercely. She missed the way he made her feel seen.
Known.
As if her story mattered even if it had never been told. As the sun rose higher, she whispered his name into the air. Once. Then again. Papa J. It felt foolish, like calling out to a ghost. But in doing so, she realized something that broke her further. No one else in the market had ever spoken his name. Not once. He had been her secret, her miracle. And now he was her loss. The days turned into weeks. She stopped bringing the chair. She stopped looking for him in crowds. But a part of her, quiet, wounded, watchful, never stopped waiting. Not really. Because something in her refused to believe he was gone without reason. He wasn't the kind of man who simply vanished. He was the kind of man who left traces. So she waited, in the only way she knew how. With the food she cooked. With the seat left empty in her heart. With the hope, sharp-edged and dangerous, that sometimes those who disappear aren't lost. They're just waiting to be found. The envelope was the color of dusk, deep, inky blue, like the hour just before nightfall, when the world holds its breath. It had no stamp, no sender, only her name written in looping, delicate script that didn't belong to anyone she knew. Esther stared at it for a long time before touching it, as if afraid the paper might vanish like a dream disturbed too soon. It had been nearly 2 months since Papa J disappeared, long enough for life to begin stitching itself back together, imperfectly. The ache was quieter now, less like a scream and more like a whisper that followed her, especially in moments of stillness. She had stopped looking for him in every passerby, had forced herself to forget the way his chair had once felt like a heartbeat beside hers. And yet this envelope, this strange and silent thing, pulled all the grief back into her chest with frightening ease. Inside was a single sheet of cream paper. The handwriting was the same, elegant, intimate. Come to the Red House on Abadina Street.
Tomorrow.
Sunset. Trust what you remember. There was no signature. No further instructions. But something about the words, the rhythm of them, the way they seemed to know her, made her breath catch in her throat. She turned the paper over and over, but there was nothing else. Only the echo of the name she hadn't heard aloud in weeks pounding like a drum in her chest. Papa J. She didn't sleep that night. Her thoughts tangled around each other, swinging between hope and suspicion. What if it was a trap? A cruel joke? What if the note wasn't from him at all, but from someone who had seen the crack in her heart and decided to slip something sharp inside it? But by the time the sun began its descent the next day, Esther was already walking. The air was thick with the scent of fried plantain and exhaust, the hum of Lagos life vibrating around her. Abadina Street was unfamiliar, tucked away from the busy road she knew, lined with low-slung buildings that had seen better years. The Red House stood at the very end, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin, windows shuttered but not broken. It looked forgotten, hidden in plain sight. Her hands trembled as she knocked. Once.
Twice.
No answer. She reached for the door, half expecting it to be locked, but it gave under her fingers, creaking open into a narrow hallway bathed in amber light. The scent hit her first, ginger, cloves, something smoky, and then, faintly, music. High life, slow and crackling, as if played on an old record. Her feet moved on their own, following the sound until it brought her to a room that seemed suspended outside of time. And there he was. Papa J stood at the far end, back to her, tending to something over a small stove. He looked exactly the same white shirt with frayed cuffs, the same tilt of the head, the same stillness that always made her feel like the rest of the world had been muted. "I knew you'd come," he said, without turning. The words cracked something inside her. Anger, relief, disbelief all surged at once, tripping over each other as she stepped forward, her voice shaky. "Where were you? You disappeared. No one knew anything. I thought you were." "Gone," he finished, finally turning to face her. His eyes were tired, but kind. "I was never gone. Just elsewhere." It wasn't an answer. Not really. But it was enough to keep her rooted there, watching as he ladled steaming broth into 2 chipped bowls, placing one in front of the chair opposite him.
Sit, he said. Eat.
Then we talk. She wanted to scream at him, to shake him, to demand why he had left her in the silence of his absence. But instead, she sat. The chair was warm, like it had been waiting for her. She took the bowl with hands that still trembled, the steam rising up to meet her like a memory. It tasted like home. They didn't speak much at first. The food carried what words couldn't: sorrow, longing, the fragile thread of something like forgiveness. And then, slowly, as the shadows lengthened around them and the music softened into nothing, he began to speak. Not all at once. Not everything. But enough. He told her of choices made long ago, of names changed and debts unpaid, of things too dangerous to speak of in the light. He told her why he had come to her stall that day, why he had kept returning, why he had seen something in her eyes that made him believe the past could be carried in gentler hands. She listened because that was all she could do. And when the night deepened and he placed a small worn notebook in her hands, filled with recipes, dates, fragments of a life he had never shared, she understood. This was his apology, his explanation, his way of staying, even if he had to leave again. When she left the red house, the stars had begun to blink into view. She didn't turn back. She didn't need to. Some people disappear to survive. Others return to be remembered. And some, like Papa J, do both, in their own time, in their own way. The weeks that followed moved with a weight and rhythm Esther hadn't known before, like walking through a dream made of smoke and secrets. The notebook Papa J had given her became a second heartbeat. Its worn pages were stained with palm oil, time, and the grief of a man who had lived several lives without telling anyone his real name. There were recipes, yes, jollof, abono, pepper soup, but also memories folded between the lines like press leaves, notes scrawled in the margins, sketches of faces, phone numbers no longer in service, addresses she didn't recognize. It was a map, she realized, of everything he had once been and everything he was still running from. She studied it every night after closing her stall, the notebook open beside her as she sat in the dim light of her one-room apartment. Each word felt sacred, like a breadcrumb leading her not just to who Papa J truly was, but also to who she was becoming. Because something had shifted since the night in the red house, not just in her understanding of him, but in her sense of herself. She was no longer just a vendor, a girl with quiet eyes and calloused hands. She was someone trusted, someone chosen, someone carrying legacy. But the truth, like all old ghosts, never stayed quiet for long. It came one morning, tucked inside a newspaper left at her stall by a stranger with a crooked smile and no name. A story buried on page 7. A fire. An old red house on Abadina Street. No bodies found, but the place had burned to its bones. She read it 3 times, her hands tightening on the edge of the paper until the print smudged. He was gone. Again. But this time, it didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like closure. Like the last note in a song that had taken too long to finish. And then came the letter. Not an envelope, not this time. A parcel, hand-delivered by a courier who asked for her by name. Inside, a key, a deed, and a letter written in the same familiar script. Esther, you've always seen more than what people show. That's your gift. It's why I came to you. Why I stayed. I didn't just disappear because of the past. I disappeared so that the future could be yours. That notebook was only the beginning. The key is to a small building in Yaba. I bought it years ago under another name. I always thought I'd use it to open a restaurant, but dreams shift. It's yours now. If you want it. No debts. No ghosts. Just the chance to make something true, something yours. Whatever you cook, cook it with your heart. That's the only recipe that matters.
Jay.
She cried then. Quietly, fully. Not just for him, but for all the years she had believed her life would only ever be one thing. For all the versions of herself she had never dared imagine. The building in Yaba was small but strong. The walls needed paint, the roof some patching. But when she stood in the center of it, light pooling through the broken windows. She saw everything clearly. Tables filled with laughter, the smell of spice and smoke and home in the air, music drifting like memory. A kitchen where the past would not be a burden, but an ingredient. She called it Mama Esther's, though she never told anyone why. The locals assumed it was in honor of her mother, and she let them think that. But deep down, she knew it was also for Papa J, the man who taught her that family isn't always blood, that truth is sometimes a choice, and that the most precious reward is not gold or glory, but the quiet, steady courage to build something beautiful from the broken. And every now and then, late at night, when the last customer had gone and she was closing up, she would catch the scent of cloves in the air or hear the faint crackle of high-life music from a speaker not plugged in, and she would smile. Some stories don't end. They simply change hands. It had been nearly a year since Mama Esther's opened its doors to the winding streets of Yaba. Word had spread not because of flashy signs or social media, but because of the way people felt when they walked through that blue-painted door, like they were returning to somewhere they had known they missed. Esther had found rhythm in the chaos of running a restaurant. Morning market runs, the hiss of oil in cast-iron pans, the clatter of plates, the sacred silence between a dish being served and the first bite taken. Her jollof was spoken of in hushed reverence, her gussie a quiet revolution. She had learned, at last, to breathe without waiting for the floor to give way beneath her. But some days, even joy carried a weight. On the nights she locked up alone, she sometimes wondered if all that had passed, Papa J, the red house, the letter, had been real at all. Memory was slippery like smoke, and grief could wear the face of gratitude so convincingly that it became hard to tell them apart. It was on one of those nights, as she wiped down the final table and turned off the lights, that she noticed the envelope wedged into the edge of the front door. No postage. No handwriting. Just her name, Esther. She opened it slowly. Something inside her still braced for bad news. But the paper held only a simple instruction. Go to the back. Open the blue crate. The crate had been delivered months ago with a shipment of plantains and forgotten behind a stack of unused chairs. It took effort to drag it out into the open, its metal edges rusted and stubborn. But when she pried the lid open, what she found inside made her drop to her knees, not out of fear, but wonder. There, nestled in old newspapers and wrapped in layers of cloth, were three things. The first was a worn cassette tape labeled "Listen when you're ready" in Papa J's handwriting. The second, a wooden spoon. Not just any spoon, but the one she had watched him stir with, stained dark with time and use, its handle carved with what she now realized were initials. J.O. And the third, folded carefully at the bottom, was a chef's coat, pure white and lined with crimson thread. On the breast, embroidered in small, deliberate letters. Executive Chef, Esther Abayomi. It took her a long moment to breathe. She brought the tape player from the back office, one she barely used, and pressed play with trembling fingers. His voice was older than she remembered it, softer, perhaps more tired, but unmistakably his. If you're hearing this, it means you didn't give up. And I'm proud of that, more than you'll ever know.
This isn't about me, Esther.
It never really was. This is about legacy. About passing something on that the world said wasn't worth keeping. But you knew it was. You knew we were. That coat, it's yours. Not because I say so, but because you earned it. The recipes were never mine to begin with. They belong to every woman who cooked with fire and faith before you. Wear it well, Omo me. And when they ask you how you did it, tell them you remembered where you came from. She didn't cry. Not that night. Not even when the tape ended in static and the room returned to its usual silence. Instead, she stood, straightened the coat against her chest, and tied it behind her back. It fit perfectly. The next day, when customers filed in and the scent of pepper soup drifted into the street like a song, they noticed something different. Not just the new coat, but something quieter, stronger, blooming behind her eyes.
She didn't tell them about the gift.
About the tape or the spoon or the voice of a man who had vanished like smoke but left behind fire. Instead, she simply smiled and said, "Today's special is something close to the heart." And every dish that left her hands that day was more than a meal. It was memory made edible. It was love disguised as spice. It was a gift wrapped in fire, passed down and passed on. Because some stories don't need to be spoken to be heard. Some stories live in the hands, in the taste, in the quiet knowing of those who eat and feel without ever needing to ask why. The rain came softly on the last evening, as if the sky itself had decided to weep in gratitude. It pattered gently against the windows of Mama Esther's, a quiet rhythm that echoed the heartbeat of the space, steady, familiar, full of life. Inside, the tables were full, not just with people but with something more intangible: warmth, laughter, memory. Children leaned into bowls of steaming okra soup, elders clinked glasses in silent toasts, and young lovers shared bites of fried plantain like sacred secrets. The restaurant pulsed with a kind of joy that could only be born from something deeply lived, deeply loved. Esther stood at the threshold of the kitchen, watching, her hands resting lightly on the wooden spoon Papa J had left her. She wore the white coat now without hesitation. It was no longer too big, not because she had grown into it, but because she had come to understand it had always been made for her. That coat had seen fire, both literal and otherwise, and it bore the stains of countless sauces and the shape of shoulders that had carried so much more than ingredients. They were celebrating the one-year anniversary of the restaurant that night, but Esther knew it wasn't just that. It was something larger, the culmination of every step taken, every tear swallowed, every decision made in faith. She had come so far from the girl who once whispered to herself in fear as she stirred burnt rice in a borrowed pot. Now, she was the keeper of a legacy, the center of a story still being told. As the evening wore on, a hush fell over the room as Esther emerged fully from the kitchen, carrying the final dish herself. It wasn't fancy, just a bowl of smoky jollof, a side of fried chicken, and a small slice of moi, but it was Papa J's recipe done her way. She placed it gently on the empty seat at the corner table, the one that had always been left open, without being explained. The customers didn't ask. They understood. Some memories deserve a place at the table. And then, as if summoned by the stillness, the front door creaked open. For a heartbeat, Esther froze, because grief plays tricks and memory can paint ghosts into flesh. But it wasn't Papa J who entered. It was Mama Folake, the woman who once ran the food stall on the corner of Makoko Road, her hair now grayer, her walk slower, but her smile unchanged. She stepped into the room like a hymn long forgotten and instantly remembered. Esther ran to her, and they embraced with the fierce tenderness of women who had known hunger, hope, and heartbreak all in the same breath. Folake said nothing at first, only pressed a small paper bag into Esther's hand. Inside were dried hibiscus petals, a small carved necklace, and a faded photograph of Papa J smiling, apron-stained, holding a dish high in triumph. "He wanted you to have these," she said simply. "He always knew you'd finish what he started." Tears came then, not the kind that burn, but the kind that cleanse. Esther nodded, unable to speak, and held the photo to her chest. Later that night, after the last table had been cleared and the lights dimmed, Esther stepped outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick with a scent of wet earth and possibility. She looked up and, for the first time in a long time, she didn't ask for a sign. She didn't need one. Because the truth was simple and sacred, Papa J wasn't gone. He was in the way the onions sizzled when they hit hot oil, in the laughter of full bellies and quiet gratitude, in the stories passed from hand to mouth, pot to plate, heart to heart. She walked back inside, the spoon still in her hand, the future stretched out before her like an empty table, waiting, wide, and full of promise. And somewhere, deep in the marrow of her spirit, a voice whispered, "You did good, Esther. You did good."